Minister, obviously we've all been reading our Public Service 2020, which is a very fine summary, I think, of the work of our 315,000 public servants, to which we are greatly indebted across obviously all the key sectors of the public service: health, education, security, and so on. What I was just asking you in particular here in relation to, because obviously the public service resource is our people, the men and women who are all around us here today and in our departments and across the whole public service throughout the Republic. How in actual fact are these great slogans that we have in the Public Service 2020, how will they operate, for example, in relation to continuous professional development, strengthening performance management, promoting quality, diversity and inclusion, the 18 actions across the 3 pillars in relation to the HR function, and for example on the equality, diversity and inclusion, you'd wonder on that one, I mean, have we not achieved that already? Do we not achieve that all the time as we recruit? So basically, how do we manage the outstanding people who work for us?
Deputy has read the document, and it was great to launch it there earlier on in the week with the Secretary General of my department. Well, Deputy, if I'd known you had such an interest in it, we'll make sure we invite you to the sequel and to other events that happen in the run-up to us. And I will ensure that we do that, because it is, as the Deputy knows, it's the 3rd iteration now of what we have been doing with civil service reform. In direct answer to your question, how are we going to make these things happen, Deputy, there's 2 ways and 2 developments that I think will allow much of that to happen. And then I'll just conclude with an observation on the interesting point you've made in relation to diversity and inclusion. Number 1, what we're going to be setting up now very, very soon is a Public Service Management Leadership Board. And we're going to have an entity that will have all of the senior leaders, not only in our civil service, but actually in our public service. So going beyond our civil servants, coming together on a regular basis to review progress in delivering this plan. That's not something that we have done before. It's separate to the Civil Service Management Board, who look at how they can implement, for example, government decisions, government policy and so on. This will all be about how we bring that document to life. The second thing that is happening now is we now have a Chief HR Officer now who's looking to roll out consistent HR practice across all government departments. And what you're going to see happen across the coming 3 years is the HR departments in government departments being strengthened and being supported more from the centre, which is the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, to make that strategy happen. It's interesting you make the point in relation to inclusion. I've noticed myself now that as recruitment into our civil service has gone back to reasonable levels over the last number of years, the huge quality and the huge diversity of young civil servants that we have coming in, I think it's really, really encouraging for the future of our civil service in Ireland. But we can't take it for granted. So, for example, we're looking at ways now in which we can better recruit in university campuses, for example.
All the 2 minutes, Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Minister. Well, very welcomed here that you've established this Public Services Development Board, is it, all across the public service. I mean, the basic point has been, I think, acknowledged is that the findings that you include in the report, for example, that our civil service is the first in the European Union as the most professional and least politicised public service, that we're 6th for the quality of public administration and 5th for perception that government decisions are implemented effectively. I mean, it's very heartening to read that, given the fact that the austerity and the cutbacks that we had in all across the public service and across the main areas of the public service were so devastating since 2008-29. It's great to be able to read that. I just wanted specifically, again, just in relation to some of the issues, would you have a concern, for example, in recent times that specialist areas within the public service, that the salary structures and rewards and so on are not sufficient? We were talking yesterday, for example, about the Department of Defence and the fact that some areas of defence we have specialists, that we need in the medical corps, for example, and so on, are just not there. And just on professional development, would you see any kind of a role for third level specialist kind of college like that you might have in countries like France, where the civil service cadre of leading civil servants are actually receive their ongoing continuous professional education?
You've taken your two questions.
In relation to the number of different questions the Deputy put to me there, number one, we're also going to have a strategic advisory board whose job will be to oversee the implementation of the strategy. In relation to salary levels and retention for specialist roles, I do believe that there could be an issue in a number of specialist roles across our civil service and public service, and this is an area now that I've asked the Public Service Pay Commission to investigate, beginning with the Health Service. I met with the Chairman of the Commission and with the Commission themselves, Mr Kevin Duffy, there a number of weeks ago. That work is now underway. But of course, I have to be very careful that any decisions we make in relation to individual roles do not unravel or adversely impact the integrity of our overall pay policy. In relation to do I believe a specialist university is required beyond what we have, the answer to that question is no. We already make great use, for example, of bodies like the IPA, the Institute of Public Administration, and indeed my own department has now started running a number of diplomas and certificates in specialist areas to support the professional development of our staff.
You have another question.
Just to ask you, again, one of the things that's stressed in the report, I suppose, is feedback from the public and delivering services and being measured by the public. And clearly, there are areas, in particular health and housing, I suppose, where there is incredible dissatisfaction among our constituents at what they would feel is the delivery of a modern, say, health service, or the delivery, we'll say, of any kind of a pipeline of social housing supply, whereas other areas, perhaps across education, across the civil service generally, people are clearly much happier, and that the basic services are being delivered. Like in that whole area, communication with the public, is that an area that that public services relatively weak on, and that needs to be strengthened, so that people are aware of the acute dissatisfaction in many areas of service delivery?
So we have, you're right, Deputy, in the strategy it does call out customer engagement as something that we need to do even better in the future. It's something now that over the last 18 months we've actually begun to do a lot of work on. The two examples that I'd offer to the Deputy are, number one, the survey that the Minister for Health launched during this week in relation to the patient experience for people who are inside or looking to enter our hospitals. And number two, we have published earlier on in the year a customer satisfaction survey for businesses who engage with our civil service. So we did it by focusing in particularly on businesses, and I was very pleased to see that across a whole number of different areas, businesses did feel they were getting fair and effective treatment out of our civil service, with particular focus on the professionalism and role of the Revenue Commissioner.
Next question.